Good afternoon. Welcome to News Plus here on Loveworld USA. I'm TGK Andre. Let's take a quick look at the top headline stories today. The U.S. strikes Iranian nuclear site. President Trump calls operation a spectacular military success. A judge blocks Trump's administration's attempt to cut Harvard's international student access. 4 plead guilty in $550 million bribery scheme involving USAID. And Elon Musk's X sues New York over content moderation disclosure law. These and more stories in the news. President Donald Trump addressed the nation on Saturday night, confirming that U.S. forces launched precision strikes against 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. The president described the mission as a spectacular military success aimed at halting Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities. The strikes followed the collapse of U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiations scheduled for June 15th in Oman. Intelligence reports indicated rapid advancements in Iran's nuclear program. U.S. officials said B-2 stealth bombers deployed bunker buster bombs at Fordo, while Tomahawk missiles targeted Natanz and Isfahan. Israel had conducted preemptive strikes days earlier. President Trump stated that Iran's facilities were obliterated and warned of future military action if Iran does not pursue peace. He thanked U.S. forces, the Israeli military, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for coordinated efforts, noting the mission was one of the most effective in decades. The Pentagon announced that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Joint Chiefs Chairman Dan Kane will provide additional details at a scheduled briefing on Sunday morning. The president ended his remarks calling for peace in the Middle East and reaffirming U.S. military readiness. Let's take a look.
Thank you very much.
The U.S. struck 3 key nuclear sites in Iran, President Donald Trump said on Saturday. He warned that Tehran would face more attacks if it didn't agree to peace.
Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
Trump's decision to join Israel's military campaign against Iran represents a major escalation of the conflict. It comes after more than a week of aerial combat between the two, with death and injuries in both countries.
There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu congratulated Trump.
History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons.
While an Iranian official cited by Tasnim news agency confirmed that one of the nuclear sites was attacked by enemy airstrikes. Israel launched attacks on Iran earlier this month, saying it wanted to remove any chance of Tehran developing nuclear weapons. Iran says its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes only. Diplomatic efforts by Western nations to stop the hostilities have been unsuccessful. CBS News reported that the U.S. reached out diplomatically to Iran on Saturday to say the strikes are all the U.S. plans and that it does not aim for regime change.
That is a blockbuster piece of information. I mean, as the news came in last night, you could feel eyes around the world glued to their screens as we witnessed, and of course as Trump posted, the United States officially entering the conflict against Iran. Of course, when we mention B-52 bombers, these are planes. It's actually funny because there was a report of somebody who noted that B-52 bombers were flying over the house 22 hours ago. B-52 bombers being long-range Army airplanes that have the capacity to travel for 34 hours, as I believe this flight was. They flew for 34 hours. These are also known as stealth bombers. So they flew undercover for 34 hours, refueling in the air to drop bunker busters. The way a bunker buster works is that it's a missile that weighs about 1,000 tons, if I recall correctly, or about Yeah, about 1,000 tons. And when it hits the ground, it hits it with such sheer force and speed that it actually slices through the ground. And then, of course, it also has a fusage detonator that allows it to first penetrate the ground because the Fordo nuclear reactor is actually hidden in mountains. And it was reported that the US sent these missiles through a ventilation system because it's heavily fortified due to the mountain ranges and the fact that it's built underground. So the bunker buster would have gone through the ventilation system, gone at least 60 feet, digging 60 feet like a tip drill through the ground, then detonating upon impact. Fortunately, the Iran government and the Iran news media did report that the Fordo nuclear plant, as along with the Isfahan and Natanz plants, had already been evacuated. So it seems like there were no casualties. But according to Israeli reports, it seems that the Iranian nuclear system has suffered a setback of at least 2 to 3 years. Now, the Iranian news media is reporting that the table for peace has disappeared, although the American government is calling for peace. But here at Loveworld USA, we will keep you updated on what happens. But as far as we know now, the United States has officially entered the Iran-Israel conflict. A federal judge on Friday issued an injunction blocking the Trump administration from revoking Harvard University's ability to enroll international students through a key federal visa system. U.S. District Judge Allison Burroughs ruled that the Department of Homeland Security cannot remove Harvard's certification to use the Student and Exchange Visitor Information System, which tracks visa applications for international students. The ruling follows an earlier temporary restraining order issued by the same court. Shortly after the ruling, President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social that his administration was in discussions with Harvard and that a potential agreement could be reached within the next week or so. Trump described the negotiations as positive, but did not provide details. DHS initially informed Harvard in May that it was revoking the university's SEVIS access, citing the school's handling of campus anti-Semitism. Harvard sued the federal government, alleging political retaliation. Judge Burroughs sided with the university, allowing it to continue enrolling international students while the case proceeds. DHS criticized the court's decision. Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin said the ruling undermines the president's constitutional and legal authority, adding that the administration is focused on reforming the student visa process and increasing oversight of foreign student admissions. International students account for about 25% of Harvard's student population. The administration has suggested capping that figure at 15% and increasing vetting, especially for those involved in activism or protests deemed hostile to U.S. interests. The case is ongoing, and further legal developments are expected in the coming weeks. Watch this.
The new order will allow international students to continue to attend the university. The elite university, while a lawsuit filed by Harvard plays out in the courts, Harvard had previously secured 2 temporary restraining orders from the boroughs against the government's move to bar international students, and the judge extended it with a preliminary injunction. Now, Trump has in fact cut federal grants for Harvard and tried a host of different tactics to block the institution from hosting international students, said that his administration had in fact been holding negotiations with Harvard. Now, taking to his Truth Social handle, Trump on Friday said that he was working closely with Harvard and that he could have in fact announced a deal over the next week. He further added that if the settlement went well, then the deal would be historic, although Trump did not provide any details about the purported deal. Now, international students have accounted for nearly about 27% of the total enrollment at Harvard in the 2024-25 academic year. In court filings, Harvard has argued that Trump's actions were retribution for Harvard exercising its First Amendment rights to reject the government's demands to control Harvard's governance, curriculum and the ideology of its faculty and students. The Trump administration has also cut nearly about $3.2 billion of funds benefiting the university, has also pledged to exclude it from any future federal funding. Now, Harvard has been at the forefront of Trump's campaign against top universities after it defied his calls to submit to oversight of its curriculum, staffing, student recruitment and viewpoint diversity. Now, Trump and his allies have claimed that Harvard and other prestigious universities are unaccountable bastions of anti-conservative bias and anti-Semitism.
We're seeing the United States tighten its security belt time and time again. with the immigration issues, and now, of course, also with immigrant students. And it seems like more and more Trump's goal is to make sure that the people inside the United States are aligned with United States values, which isn't necessarily the worst thing or a crazy thing to state. You look at other countries that are strongly patriotic. You look at countries like China that have made rapid advancements, countries like Japan, South Korea, certain countries across the globe that are doing well for themselves. And one common denominator that you can find is a strong sense of patriotism, a strong sense of general understanding amongst the populace that you support this country despite the good or bad that the country has done. This is your country, and as long as you are in this country, you are doing your best to make the country a better place in the way that you see fit, in line with the legalities and the rules of said country. So, of course, when you have the anti-Semitic actions occurring on Harvard, of course, not speaking about the protests involving Mahmoud Khalil at Columbia and other situations, but very flagrant acts of anti-Semitism, not protests, flagrant acts of anti-Semitism that aren't being checked properly by Harvard. It makes you wonder, especially the fact that they're coming from a lot of immigrants, what Harvard is teaching said immigrants when they come into the country, and what sort of mirror it's holding up, whether that mirror is actually reflecting the values of the country or refracting the values of the country into a light that does not actually suit the needs and the demands of the United States government. Of course, now the courts have put an injunction on that order to allow Harvard to continue bringing in students with their visas. But knowing the Trump administration, they've had their many days in court so far this year, and I know that they're gearing up for another one to go ahead and fight this injunction. 4 individuals, including a federal contracting officer and 3 businessmen, have pled guilty to participating in a $550 million bribery scheme involving the U.S. Agency for International Development. The Department of Justice announced that bribes range from cash and electronics to NBA tickets and mortgage assistance. Roderick Watson, a former USAID contracting officer, admitted to accepting bribes from contractors beginning in 2013. DOJ records showed the business owners Walter Barnes and Darrell Britt, through subcontractor Paul Young, concealed payments using shell companies, fake invoices, and payroll fraud. Authorities estimate Watson received over $1 million in illicit benefits. The scheme unraveled amid broader scrutiny of USAID spending. As part of a larger government initiative to reduce fraud and waste, the agency's operations were scaled down, with several programs reassigned to the State Department. Congressional hearings and protests followed after the agency's headquarters were shuttered and staff placed on leave earlier this year. According to the DOJ and USAID Office of Inspector General, efforts are ongoing to identify further misconduct. Corruption in government programs will not be tolerated, said USAID's OIG's Sean Bottery. The agency has faced criticism for controversial funding allocation in recent years, including programs abroad focused on diversity and equity initiatives. Let's take a look.
Barnes and Darrell Britt funneled payoffs through subcontractor Paul Young to hide their tracks. It doesn't end there. Barnes's company, working in conjunction with another firm, kept receiving federal funds, $5,000 for human resources consulting late last year, and then later, after suing the government, a contract worth up to $800 million. Matthew R. Galliotti, head of the Justice Department's criminal division, saying, quote, "Their scheme violated the public trust by corrupting the federal government's procurement process. Anybody who cares about good and effective government should be concerned about the waste, fraud, and abuse in government agencies, including USAID. Cutting waste, fraud, and abuse has been a big focus on Capitol Hill across government, a major priority for House Speaker Mike Johnson. The U.S. Agency for International Development has been a target for those looking to trim government spending, with some suggesting the agency funneled taxpayer dollars into ideological projects."
I mean, USAID blew it. They showed themselves to be completely irresponsible. It needs to be redone, and the funds need to be directed properly.
This is part of what DOJ has worked so hard to uncover. We've seen USAID's spending over years and years and years. And the annoying thing sometimes about bureaucracy in this American government is the fact that you can have an entity like the Pentagon fail an audit 7-8 years in a row and nobody bats an eye. You can have USAID give out billions of dollars and nobody bats an eye because it's just money. because it's money that they're not working to get. It's taxpayer money that they believe grows on trees. And now you're hearing that $500 million was moved illicitly through bribery. And you're wondering why Doge wasn't necessary. Because these are the kind of things that were going on inside the United States government. There's point blank evidence and irrefutable proof. They've confessed and they're serving their 3-year deferred sentences. But we're seeing $500 million of taxpayer funds. Not funds earned by sales, not funds earned by businesses, taxpayer money. Money that people struggling to pay groceries are funding the government with. Money that people who can't afford diapers are paying to the United States government is being used or is being funneled illicitly into programs and companies that don't deserve it. And you wonder why people demand greater government insight, because they want to know where their money goes. Everybody deserves the right to know where their money goes, because it's clear that in certain instances, in certain parts of the government, that they cannot be trusted to do it on their own. So it's good that the truth is coming to light, and hopefully in the future less taxpayer dollars are wasted. Social media platform X has filed a federal lawsuit against the state of New York, challenging a new law that requires platforms to disclose how they handle offensive content. The law, signed by Governor Kathy Hochul in 2024, mandates that companies report twice a year on how they define and manage categories like hate speech, disinformation, and extremist material. X argues the requirement violates the First Amendment and federal law protecting internet platforms' discretion in moderating content. Filed in Manhattan federal court, the suit claims New York is attempting to pressure platforms into censoring lawful speech through politically motivated reporting rules. Attorney General Letitia James' office said it is reviewing the complaint and will defend the law's constitutionality. The legislation is part of a broader push for transparency by state lawmakers, but has drawn legal challenges similar to those in California, where parts of a comparable law were blocked by a federal appeals court. Watch this.
Elon Musk is suing New York. Not over taxes, not over tech, but over free speech. And the stakes? They could rewrite how social media works across America. X Corp, the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, has filed a lawsuit against the state of New York. The reason? A controversial new law that demands social platforms disclose how they handle hate speech, extremism, and disinformation. Known as the Stop Hiding Hate Act, the law requires companies like X to publicly report how they police harmful content, or face daily fines of up to $15,000 per violation. Backed by state lawmakers and the Anti-Defamation League, it aims to make platforms more transparent and accountable. But Musk's team says it's unconstitutional. In court documents, X argues that forcing platforms to publish how they handle controversial speech violates the First Amendment and hands too much control over content moderation to the government. Interestingly, New York's law mirrors a 2023 California law that was partially blocked by a federal court for the same reasons. California later agreed not to enforce that law against X after a legal settlement. The case has political undercurrents too. Lawmakers behind the bill accuse Musk of weakening content standards, calling his moderation track record disturbing. Musk, meanwhile, describes himself as a free speech absolutist and close advisor to Donald Trump. This isn't just about one company. It's about whether states can compel tech platforms to disclose internal policies, and where the line is drawn between public accountability and government overreach. Who decides what you can say online? Tech billionaires, state lawmakers, or the Constitution?
This law passed by Kathy Hochul in New York is looking like a piece of government overreach. It makes sense to be able to moderately police social media content that goes on in your state, but the issue with that is the fact that social media is owned by private entities. The First Amendment does protect the freedom of speech, which the government has the right to police over, but when it comes to a private platform, since it's not a government platform or it's not the public space necessarily, it's a virtual public space, they reserve the right to post what they want on there. For example, if somebody wanted to post nothing but boxing videos, some people might find that disturbing, unless it's a website titled boxingvideos.com, where in that space on that website, they've created an area to post what they want. If you don't want to watch that, don't go to the website. That's how social media is. These are, as public as they might be, these are owned by private entities. If you don't enjoy the content that's on there, don't go to the website. So giving the government the ability to have that much overreach and insight into a privately owned platform that, of course, their citizens would use, X being one of the most widely used social media platforms in the world, might make sense a bit, but when you actually come to think about it, nobody's forcing anybody to go on those platforms. So the ability to regulate what they call moderation, so moderating the moderators on these platforms, is almost like giving the government the ability to say, we will let you allow this on your website, or you can't allow this on your website, which then turns into government overreach of private property. We will take a break, and when we return, we'll take a look at some of the stories that made the headlines this week. Don't go anywhere.
Money is the sign of shortage. Money is not the sign of blessing, it is the sign of shortage. Money is not the evidence of blessing, it is the evidence of shortage. It is the evidence of lack. I know nobody ever told you that. So you better listen to me now. I walk in absolute prosperity, so I can tell you, money is not a sign of prosperity, it's a sign of lack. It's a game that defines the classification of people. Once you are able to see beyond it and understand what God's plan is and who you are not controlled by money. Money becomes your slave. Somebody said, I wish I heard what Pastor just said in the month of May. Month of blessing, I would have applied it. You still have time. We carry all the blessings of the previous month into the new ones. That's what we do. Never let the thought of money control your attitude.
Yes, sir.
You know, there are people who become happy when they have money. And when they don't have it, you can tell. You just look at them, you can tell. You can tell they're broken down. Money's their master. They're worshiping the God of Mammon. When you are delivered from that, or when you've not been enslaved by that, you don't know when you've had money and when you've not had money, because you don't operate with those numbers. La korabakasaya, rabakandalobosia. Are you still there?
Welcome back. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled 6-3 in favor of Tennessee's 2023 law that prohibits gender-related medical treatment for minors. In U.S. versus Scrimetti, the justices found the law did not violate the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The decision upholds restrictions on puberty blockers and hormone therapy for individuals under 18 who identify as transgender. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, stated that the law met the rational basis standard of judicial review, which requires a law to be reasonably related to a legitimate government interest. The court concluded that Tennessee's interest in protecting children from potentially harmful and unproven treatments justified the law. The 3 liberal justices dissented, arguing the law was discriminatory. The Biden administration and several families had sued to stop the law, claiming it discriminated based on sex and transgender status. However, the court determined the law regulates medical practices based on age and treatment purpose, not on protected characteristics. Tennessee's law is one of many similar measures passed across the country. President Donald Trump has backed policies recognizing only 2 biological sexes and has moved to restrict federal funding for gender-related procedures for minors. Those executive actions are also facing legal challenges in the federal courts. Watch this.
To consider whether the ban violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, but the court has essentially ruled the decision on these bans should fall to the states. Tennessee is among 26 states that have moved to prohibit puberty blockers and hormone therapy for trans minors, so this ruling could determine access to care for hundreds of thousands of trans children. For more, let's bring in Hofstra Law.
Again, this is another example of the, quite frankly, vulgar workings of a very sinister leftist agenda. All this law does is block the assignment, of course, of surgeries and assignment of puberty blockers from children under 18, not people, children, because if you're under 18, especially in American society, you're very much typically a child. These are the same people that can't vote. These are the same people that can't smoke or drink. These are the same people who aren't sure what they're going to wear tomorrow, or who aren't sure of what their lives are going to look like in 3 or 4 years. But they can definitely be sure of the fact that they're not in the right body or that they're not the right gender. And people want to defend this. The law isn't banning it outright, which wouldn't even be a crazy thing to suggest. It's banning it for people under 18. It's banning it for children. I mean, science states that a male prefrontal cortex fully develops between the ages of 23 and 25, for women typically 21 to 22. These are people whose brains, according to the science that they so love to claim, whose brains haven't fully developed yet. But we're supposed to believe that they're developed enough to make life-altering decisions like that. The government is trying to protect them from themselves at this point. But of course, you have the people who believe in my body, my choice. Let them be, let them do whatever they want. Although we've seen time and time again that there have been many instances of people regretting these decisions. So it's good on the Supreme Court for allowing this law to be passed in Tennessee for it to be upheld. President Donald Trump is extending the deadline for ByteDance to divest from TikTok by another 90 days, the White House announced on Tuesday. This marks the third time enforcement of a bipartisan law aimed at banning the app in the U.S. has been delayed since President Trump took office in January. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said the extension is meant to give more time to finalize a deal ensuring American control over TikTok's U.S. operations. The Department of Justice will continue to withhold penalties against app platforms like Apple and Google during the extension. Previous negotiations to spin off TikTok into a U.S.-controlled entity stalled after China pushed back in response to President Trump's new tariffs. Through discussions with Chinese President Xi Jinping occurred this month, TikTok was not officially part of those talks, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed it was not addressed in recent U.S.-China trade meetings. Congress passed a law mandating ByteDance sell TikTok by January 19, 2025, citing national security concerns. While the law was upheld by the Supreme Court, President Trump has chosen not to enforce it so far, prompting some lawmakers to question the limits of executive authority and call for clarity. Let's take a look.
The president plans to sign an executive order this week that would keep the platform running despite a bipartisan law banning it over national security concerns. The order will give ByteDance 3 more months to...
I know the teenagers at home, if they're listening to this, are rejoicing in joy that one of their favorite social media platforms has another 3 months of legality in the United States. Of course, China does have a history of controlling companies through their state extensions. You have ByteDance, you have Tencent, which are 2 of the biggest digital companies worldwide that have combined billions of users. The issue with that being said is the fact that since those companies do store user information, and China does have a hand in their dealings, China could also have a hand in user information, allowing China to have access, unfettered access, to billions of users' information around the world, which of course does pose a quite significant security risk, which is why the United States is looking to ban it unless ByteDance divests to a US-backed platform. I mean, Microsoft, Amazon, different companies have put in bids to acquire TikTok from ByteDance, but of course China has rebuffed them. And it seems like this situation will be revisited again in 90 days, so be sure to stay tuned with Loveworld USA, where we will keep you updated on the story as it continues. The Department of Homeland Security has implemented new guidelines restricting congressional visits to immigration enforcement field offices, citing operational concerns. The directive, issued this month, grants U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement sole authority to deny or cancel visits by members of Congress to its facilities. Under federal law, members of Congress may enter detention centers without prior notice. However, the DHS guidelines assert that this provision does not apply to ICE field offices, which often temporarily detain immigrants. ICE is now requesting a 72-hour notice for congressional visits to these field offices and reserves the right to terminate visits for any reason. President Donald Trump's administration has intensified immigration enforcement since returning to office in January. The president has pledged to deport large numbers of unauthorized immigrants and has taken steps to remove international students with pro-Palestinian views. The DHS guidelines state that while efforts will be made to accommodate lawmakers, ICE's authority over access is final and unreviewable. Recent enforcement actions include the prosecution of Representative LaMonica McIver following a confrontation during an attempted oversight visit, and the arrest of other Democratic officials at ICE facilities, including Newark Mayor Ross Baraka and New York City Comptroller Brad Lander. Of course, at Loveworld USA, we have kept you updated with the news on the ICE riots and the protests that have happened state to state and city to city across the United States in the last week as part of the No Kings movement. Part of the issue with that is that we've seen representatives who do have the right, of course, as federally elected representatives, to visit ICE detention facilities, but not the actual ICE field offices, because those ICE field offices are also considered federal property that typically would require a notice. This now they're making public and asking for 72 hours to avoid conflicts that have seemingly popped up time and time again that are almost seeming like media optics to fan the flames of Trump's authoritarian regime in the United States. So what ICE is now asking for is a time period of 3 days. Again, they will let them in. They just need a 3-day notice that they're coming, which shouldn't be that hard to give, especially if the main goal isn't for optics, but to see the people you're so claiming to defend. But we'll see how it goes, of course. You know how it goes when people have agendas that they need to push and optics that they need to show. We'll be right back with more news. Be sure to stay tuned.
The life of a soldier is not just a job, it's a calling and a sacred tradition passed down from father to son, brother to sister, and one generation to the next. At every hour of danger, our noblest citizens have answered that call. Time and again, our enemies have learned that if you dare to threaten the American people, American soldier will chase you down, crush you, and cast you into oblivion. The last sound you ever hear will be the dueling howl of Black Hawks. Thunderous boom of artillery fire. Or the ferocious roar of a U.S. Army infantry brigade. For our adversaries, there's no greater fear than the United States Army. Now it's your duty to shield the flame of freedom that was first lit 250 years ago by the heroes of Concord Bridge and Bunker Hill. Standing before you today, I am more confident than ever that in the days ahead and every generation to come, the U.S. Army will heap glory upon glory. You will protect every inch of U.S. soil, and you will defend America to the end.
Welcome back. Researchers have confirmed what is now believed to be the largest password leak in history, involving 16 billion login credentials tied to major platforms including Apple, Facebook, Google, GitHub, and Telegram. According to cybersecurity investigators at Cyber News, the breach includes fresh data not previously reported and is believed to be the result of multiple infostealer attacks. The exposed datasets, some containing more than 3.5 billion records each, were reportedly compiled from a broad range of services, including VPNs, developer platforms, and social media sites. Most of the leaked data includes structured login information in the form of URLs, usernames, and passwords. Experts warned that the scale of this breach could lead to widespread phishing attempts and unauthorized account access. Cybersecurity firms are advising both individual users and organizations to take immediate precautions. Darren Gaccioni, CEO of Keeper Security, emphasized the need for strong password management and dark web monitoring tools to detect and respond to compromised credentials. Guccione noted that misconfigured cloud environments remain a major risk for future leaks. The leak highlights the growing threat of data exposure and the importance of adopting protective measures, such as multi-factor authentication, zero trust access policies, and secure credential management. Law enforcement agencies have not commented yet on any investigation into the source of the breach. Watch this.
Which analyze about 30 newly surfaced data sets. Each database contains about 16 million to about 3.5 billion records, with most averaging about 550 million entries. Notably, only one of these data sets, 184 million credential leak, had been previously reported, and the rest are believed to be fresh and highly exploitable. Now, these data sets include not just passwords but also cookies, tokens and metadata, making them especially dangerous for users and organizations relying on weak authentication methods. The leaked data reportedly came from unsecured Elasticsearch and object storage instances likely operated or compromised by cyber criminals. Now, cybersecurity experts have linked the breach to multiple info stealers, malware designed to extract sensitive data from infected devices. And the stolen credentials offer access to nearly every kind of online service imaginable, from social media accounts and developer portals to government services. The biggest concern, of course, lies with crypto users. Many custodial wallets and cloud-based seed phrase backups are tied to email credentials, making them vulnerable to account takeovers and potential asset loss. Now, experts are warning that this breach could lead to a surge in phishing, account hijacking and identity theft, especially in sectors like crypto, finance and cloud-based services. The FBI and Google are now urging users to replace their traditional passwords with pass keys and to immediately enable two-factor authentication. Organizations are advised to audit their access protocols, revoke compromised credentials, and also inform users of potential risk. As researchers put it, this isn't just a breach, it's a blueprint for global cyber exploitation.
As someone with a background in identity management, I'm going to say this to the viewers at home. If you have the ability to, on any platform, whether that's your banking app, whether that's your email, whether that's your work account, whether that's your social media accounts, enable multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication meaning that there's two different steps for you to log in. First could be you typing in your password, and then the second would be then the platform you're trying to log into sending you a simple text or asking you to go through an authenticator app to confirm your identity. By enabling that, you can get around most of these issues, because right now, as you're seeing, a password alone won't be able to save you from an info stealer attack. And if you can, change your passwords as soon as possible. Please. This is the largest breach in American history for a reason, and I can assure you that in the coming weeks, you're going to be receiving a lot more phishing attempts. As we speak, I've already received reports from hundreds of people in different forums online claiming that they have, especially from the elderly, if you're on WhatsApp or if you're on Telegram, that their accounts have been hacked over the last few days, probably linked to the info stealer accounts stealing passwords. So again, if you can, change your passwords and look into enabling multi-factor authentication on your most trusted and most necessary platforms. Federal Housing Finance Agency Director William Pulte has publicly called for Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell to resign, citing ongoing high interest rates that he argues are hurting American homeowners and the broader economy. Pulte, appearing and appointing under President Donald Trump, criticized Powell in a series of public posts, stating that keeping rates elevated has worsened the housing supply crisis and restricted affordability for potential homebuyers. President Trump echoed the sentiment, labeling Powell the worst and accusing him of damaging the U.S. economy by not cutting rates despite declining inflation. The Federal Reserve announced on Wednesday that it would maintain the federal funds rate between 4.25% and 4.5%, marking the fourth consecutive meeting without a rate change. Trump and Pulte contend that this decision ignores improving economic conditions and limits mortgage accessibility. Meanwhile, economist Peter Schiff offered a contrasting view, arguing that interest rates remain too low given continued borrowing levels and a low national savings rate. Skiv contends the current rates have not adequately curbed inflationary pressures or promoted financial stability. Let's take a look.
Trump writes this: we should be 2.5 points lower and save billions on all of Biden's short-term debt. We have low inflation. Federal Housing FHFA Director Bill Pulte is taking it one step further. He is calling on Powell to resign.
It seems like the fire under General Powell has been stoking itself pretty quickly. As we did report, it's been the fourth meeting without a rate cut, although the inflation rate, not yet at its target, is nearing that 2.1% target. It's currently sitting at about 2.8%, if I recall correctly. And it's one of the situations where, of course, the head of housing federally, William Pulte, has to complain because we're seeing a surge of sellers, homeowners are looking to sell, who can't find buyers because the interest rates are too high. But we're also seeing a surge of buyers who want to buy, who aren't able to afford these prices and are waiting for something, meaning that the market is remaining at a stall because neither side are budging. Sellers don't want to, of course, in this economy that's been a bit tentative, reduce their prices and lose out on opportunity costs. And buyers, who are hoping for interest rates to be lowered, and of course also don't want to pay as much, are hoping for interest rates to go down, meaning that there's not much traction on the market. A rate cut would certainly change that, if only by 2 points, which is certainly more than understandable given this economy. And now, let's take a look at the weather update. And to end the news today, a quick recap of the headlines. The U.S. strikes Iranian nuclear sites. President Trump calls operation a spectacular military success. Judge blocks Trump administration attempt to cut Harvard's international student access. 4 plead guilty in $550 million bribery scheme involving USAID. And Elon Musk's ex sues New York over content moderation disclosure law. And that's News Plus for today. Remember to join us same time tomorrow for more. I'm TGK Andre. Good night and God bless you.